Hello everyone, and welcome back to Isaiah for Latter-day Saints. Today we're going to be doing Isaiah 45, and there's some interesting things in this chapter. This chapter and the chapter before it, as well as maybe 41, there does appear to be some textual corruption. It's these chapters that make people say, oh well, all of Deutero-Isaiah is late. Well, maybe not. I think there's a few lines that maybe are late. I don't know if I've mentioned this before, I'm sure I have, but just as a reminder, there is a lack of uniformity in the language of Deutero-Isaiah. Some of it looks like it's written in pre-exilic biblical Hebrew, the kind that Isaiah would have spoken, the kind of Hebrew Isaiah would have spoken from before, basically the time of Lehi. That's sort of the cutoff there, is the times when the Babylonians come in and they take over Jerusalem. So a lot of that is in here in Deutero-Isaiah, maybe half of it, but roughly the other half is late biblical Hebrew. So this has been edited after they got back from Babylon, but this is not totally unexpected. We do sort of expect this with just linguistic updating. The Great Isaiah Scroll has been updated to fit that time period. So the notion that there is some updating of the language and some tweaking of some things for these people in this time who maybe really identify with this, that's maybe not so weird. So, once again, we can't just throw up our hands and say, well, this is all late. Clearly it's not. Linguistically it's not. But there is some late stuff in here. So, basically, this has been edited, and we have to deal with the edits. But I think we can navigate it. And it's really not going to be too terrible. But like I said, there's all these references to Cyrus. One wonders if anybody really would have understood that at the time. Probably not. So we'll talk more about some of that today. So here, Isaiah 45, we have to remember the context is Isaiah 44. Is talking about Cyrus saying all these things that are going to happen, that confirmeth the word of his servant, and performeth the counsel of his messengers, that saith to Jerusalem, thou shalt be inhabited, and to the cities of Judah ye shall be built. I will raise up the decayed places thereof. That saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up the rivers. And then this kind of probably interpolation, that saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, and shall perform all my pleasure. Kind of doesn't make sense in the context. It probably should be, that saith to the deep, be dry, and I will dry up the rivers. That saith to Jerusalem, thou shalt be built, into the temple thy foundation shall be laid. We talked about this, the notion of fixing up the temple. Once again, thy foundation shall be laid, maybe a slight updating of something there. They are probably talking about fixing the temple. I'm not sure foundation is right, but somebody may have seen, oh, they're talking about fixing the temple. This has got to be from talking about our time, so they tweaked it slightly to be talking about laying the foundation. Although, one wonders if literally they're having to lay any foundation. Presumably the temple is just being wiped off the top of the actual building. Stones are being wiped off the foundation. So it's interesting that it would even say, thy foundation shall be laid, although maybe for some reason these later people are doing it again, rebuilding the foundation. But either way, there is this reference to Jerusalem and refurbishing Jerusalem. And so then in 45 we get this. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, to Cyrus, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gates shall not be shut. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass, and cut in sunder the bars of iron, and I will give thee the treasures of darkness, and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. For Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel mine elect, I have even called thee by thy name. I have surnamed me, though thou hast not known me. Now what is going on here? Once again, I think that it's a little bit weird that Cyrus is being talked about here. If this is really Cyrus, then Cyrus is the only king that is ever talked about as being an anointed one that is a Gentile. All other anointed kings in the Old Testament are Israelite kings. So isn't it a little odd that we have this guy Cyrus being talked about as an anointed one? Maybe that's true, or maybe there's a textual error here. If we just drop Cyrus's name, it works all right. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed, whose right hand I have holden, to subdue nations before him, and I will loose the loins of kings, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gate shall not be shut. No problem. This does not have to be Cyrus. It almost feels like a gloss of them shoving in the name Cyrus here. That probably does not have to be here. But if it's not Cyrus, who is it? Now, back in chapter 41, we talked about Abraham and how Abraham is the man from the east. Literally, God has called Abraham from the east to come and do all these things. So what if this is Abraham? I think it probably is. This brings out a side of Abraham that we don't think about, but it does show up in the Old Testament. It shows up in Genesis. So let's think of it from that perspective. Thus saith the Lord to his anointed. Now, we do not have any instance of Abraham being anointed in the Old Testament. At least none that is incredibly obvious. However, Psalm 105 does refer to Abraham as being anointed. Let's read it really quick. It talks about remembering all the great things God has done. Remember his marvelous works that he hath done. O ye seed of Abraham his servant, ye children of Jacob his chosen. He is the Lord our God, his judgments are in all the earth. He that remembered his covenant forever, the word which he commanded to 1,000 generations, which covenant he made with Abraham, and his oath unto Isaac, and confirmed unto the same unto Jacob for a law, unto Israel for an everlasting covenant, saying, Unto thee will I give the land of Canaan, a lot of your inheritance. When they were but a few men in number, yea, very few, and strangers in it, when they went from one nation to another, from one kingdom to another, he suffered no man to do them wrong. Yea, he reproved kings for their sakes, saying, Touch not mine anointed, and do my prophets no harm. When you look down, the very next thing he's talking about is the famine with Joseph. But earlier on here, he's talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and here he's referred to as anointed. So there's clearly some kind of a tradition floating around of Abraham being anointed. Now, when we think of this in light of the book of Abraham and the very obvious temple symbolism in the book of Abraham, and the notion of Abraham being anointed is actually suddenly not at all strange. So this idea of Abraham being the anointed one, not Cyrus, makes a lot more sense in light of just about everything here in the Old Testament. Cyrus being the anointed one is incredibly strange, but if it's Abraham, it's a little less weird. So, thus saith the Lord to his anointed, Abraham, whose right hand I have holden, or maybe strengthened, something like that. But once again, in a temple context, holding someone by the right hand, not so strange, to subdue nations before him. Now, to subdue nations before him, we don't think of Abraham as being a fighter, but literally, in Genesis, there's a scene where Abraham goes out and fights a guy who's called, quote, the King of Nations. Right? Let's look at it right now. So here in Genesis 14, verse 9, it's talking about these kings go out, they are fighting, they take Lot captive. It says with Chedorlaomer, the king of Elam, and with Tidal, king of nations, and with Amraphel, king of Shinar, and Arioch, king of Elasar, 4 kings with 5. And then it talks about this battle, and Abraham goes out, and he fights these guys, and he rescues Lot, and then he divides the spoil and gives it to Melchizedek. So there's this scene of him fighting, but notice that name, Tidal, king of nations. King of nations, or king of the Gentiles. So what does he say? To subdue nations before him. So I think he's referring to this scene. Once again, someone is going back, as in chapter 41, and conflating Cyrus and Abraham, but we don't need to do that here. We can realize that that's a conflation and say, okay, this is just Abraham. To subdue nations, literally, king of nations, before him, and I will loose the loins of kings. Once again, back in the day when you take people captive, you will literally strip them and then send them into exile. So literally, loose the loins of kings, you probably strip the loins of kings. So you're stripping these kings naked to send them into exile, which is what you do, or to take them as slaves, to open before him the two-leaved gates, and the gate shall not be shut. And once again, the idea of I'm opening these big gates of these cities to you, so you can come in and conquer them, and they're not going to be shut again. No problem. So far, so good. This all works just fine for Abraham. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. Once again, we've talked about this before, but in the ancient Near East, if I'm going to go out on campaign, chariots are not great for places that are not flat. But he's pulling in this military imagery. I will go before thee and make the crooked places straight. In other words, we're going to make these really difficult to navigate places just flat, so you can easily ride a chariot in there for military purposes. I will break in pieces the gates of brass and cut in sunder the bars of iron. All these fortifications God is going to cut down. And I will give thee the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places, that thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. Once again, this is just what you do when you go to war. Everybody tries to stash their loot. You find the loot. There in Genesis, we saw Abraham is dedicating all this stuff to Melchizedek. So he has gone in. He's found the loot from the place. He's bringing it back to Melchizedek. Once again, this works just fine. The idea of finding stuff people have stashed away, it's no problem. That thou mayest know that I, the Lord, which call thee by thy name, am the God of Israel. Once again, we have to remember here something. As you go through this, I've not been using the Septuagint much, but every now and then we still need it. In the Septuagint, some of this is past tense, and some of it is present tense. But there's some things that are present tense that are actually past tense in the Septuagint. Once again, suggesting there's some textual corruption going on here. If that's the case, then we're dealing actually with, once again, something that happened in the past. I have given thee the treasures of darkness. I have gone before thee, right? So instead of I will go before you, someone has maybe tweaked this to refer to Cyrus. The Septuagint suggests, no, this should be past tense. I've gone before you to do this. I have done all these things for you in the past. So I have given you treasures of darkness. So then, I, the Lord, which have called you by your name, am the God of Israel. Now, literally, think about this for a minute. God literally gives Abraham his name. Abraham is just Abram. And then God says, no, now you're Abraham. I'm renaming you. God has called him by his name. And so he's saying, listen, I did all these things so that you would know that I, the God that calls you by your name, am the God of Israel. I am the God of your people. And so this actually makes a lot of sense in this context. But as we take a step back, let's finish this little section, and then take a step back and think about what else it could mean. As for Jacob my servant's sake, and Israel mine elect, it's parallelism. Jacob and Israel are the same, and they are, remember, Jacob's name gets changed to Israel. So he's saying Jacob and Israel are, this person is my servant, and to expand out, he's talking about his whole people, the people of Israel. He says, I've even called thee by thy name. Once again, Jacob gets a new name, but he is calling all of Israel by their name, right? He's the one that's named Israel. I have surnamed thee, though thou hast not known me. Once again, this should probably be past. I have named you, even though you did not know me, right? You did not know me before. Talking about Abraham. He's doing all these things for Abraham for the sake of Israel, who was going to come after Abraham, even though Abraham did not know him. Now, in the book of Abraham, it's pretty clear Abraham knows about God, but he doesn't seem to actually have an intimate relationship with him until a little bit later on. And so, I have surnamed you, even though you did not know me, actually makes a lot of sense here. Because in the book of Abraham seems to know something about God early on. It's pretty early on that God calls to him after the incident with his father and says, okay, you need to come and move to this new place. But in Genesis, God seems to just come and meet Abraham sort of out of the blue. Abraham doesn't seem to know Jehovah at first. And so that may be the tradition Isaiah is running with here, is this idea of, well, you didn't know me. I've named you. I've given you this name, even though you didn't know me. It just came right out of the blue. God just comes right out of the blue to Abraham and says, hi, so I'm Jehovah, and so I need you to move to this place, and I'm going to be your God. So there's this interesting idea here with this, that God is sort of meeting Abraham for the first time, hence, even though you did not know me, is what we're getting here in Isaiah. So let's then keep on going with this. In light of that, this thing that seems like an insertion, where suddenly he starts in the next few verses talking about idols and stuff, and him being the only God, you go, what is he talking about? It makes no sense. But if it's Abraham, it makes perfect sense, because that's the context of Abraham leaving and coming to a new place. Is in the book of Abraham, we see that there's all these issues with all these other gods, and Abraham has to leave that and worship the one God. So if you're picking up the allusion to Abraham, this thing that looks like an insertion is not an insertion. It actually makes perfect sense in the context. So let's read through this. Verse 5, I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me, that they may know from the rising of the sun and from the west that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Drop down, ye heavens, from above, and let the skies pour down righteousness. Let the earth open, and let them bring forth salvation, and let righteousness spring up together. I, the Lord, have created it. Woe unto him that striveth with his maker. Let the potsherds strive with the potsherds of the earth. Shall the clay say to him that fashioneth it, What makest thou? Or thy work, He hath no hands? Woe to him that saith to his father, What begettest thou? Or to the woman, What hast thou brought forth? Thus saith the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, and his Maker, Ask me of things to come concerning my sons, and concerning the work of my hands, command ye me. I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens, and all their hosts have I commanded. I have raised him up in righteousness. I will direct all his ways. He shall build my city, and he shall let go my captives, not for price nor reward, saith the Lord of hosts. Thus saith the Lord, the labor of Egypt and merchandise of Ethiopia and the Sabians, men of stature, shall come over unto thee, and they shall be thine. They shall come after thee, in chains they shall come over, and shall fall down unto thee. They shall make supplication unto thee, saying, Surely God is in thee, and there is none else. There is no God. So what is this here? Here in verse 5, like I said, in the context of Abraham, this makes sense. Abraham is leaving the place where there's these other gods. He's coming to Canaan. He's just worshiping Jehovah. So, I am the Lord, and there is none else. Now remember, also in Isaiah's context, this makes perfect sense. The Assyrians have almost fought, it looks like the Assyrians have fought Israel to a standstill, right? It looks like Ashur and Yahweh tied, right? And so Isaiah has to say, guys, that's not what happened here, okay? And this is when he sort of is calling in Abraham as a witness to this. The early Abraham tradition that we get in the book of Abraham, there's some conflation with some of the traditions here, it looks like. But he's calling this in to say, listen, guys, there is no God besides me. The Ashur and Yahweh did not tie. Ashur is not a real deity. There's just the Lord. He says, I am the Lord, and there is none else. There is no God beside me. There is no other God besides Yahweh. I girded thee, though thou hast not known me. Now, in the context of Abraham, the temple stuff in Abraham, the notion of being clothed or girded, once again, makes sense. You didn't know me before, Abraham, but I chose you and I clothed you. Once again, in the temple context, this makes sense. That they may know from the rising of the sun, that everyone will know from the rising of the sun and from the west, all the way across the whole world, everyone will know that there is none beside me. I am the Lord, and there is none else. I form the light and create darkness. This idea of Jehovah is the one that makes everything. He makes the light and he makes the darkness. He says, I make peace and create evil. I, the Lord, do all these things. Now, that's a little bit uncomfortable for us. The notion that he makes peace and creates evil is a little bit disturbing. But in the idea of the ancient Near East, there is this notion that, there's these gods, and they're like fighting, and sometimes good things happen because of this god, and sometimes bad things happen because of this god, and kind of whoever wins is fine. Well, that's what Jehovah is specifically pushing back against. That's what Isaiah is specifically pushing back against here, that is not a real thing. He says, I'm the one that makes light and darkness. I'm the one that makes peace and creates evil. Now, what does the word evil actually mean here? I'm not sure it means what we think it means. I'm not sure we should look at this in some kind of an abstract way, like evil writ large. I think we should look at this as in the context. He's saying, I form the light and make darkness. I make peace. And then the opposite of peace would be evil, like evil times, like bad things that happen. When you look at back in the Hebrew and sort of contextually, that works here. And of course, that fits the context. He's saying, no, these bad things that happened with this war was not about Asher and Yahweh fighting and sort of tying. The bad things happened because I had them happen to you. I allowed these bad things to happen to you. I brought the Assyrians in on you to punish you so that you would repent. And that's pretty uncomfortable, but that's what we've seen the whole time. The Assyrians are the rod of his anger, right? So this is what we're seeing here, I think. He says, I, the Lord, do all these things. And this actually works quite well. He's saying, no, there's not these other deities. I'm the one doing all of this. Now, it's interesting that he uses light and darkness and good and bad here as contrasts. Later in the chapter, he's going to reference some stuff from Zoroastrianism. Just as a refresher, what probably happened is you've got Zoroaster around 1000 BC-ish. People date him later, but the linguistic evidence is very clear. It's about 1000 BC. You bring Zoroaster's ideas, it starts to spread all around. When the Assyrians take captives from out there in that area, in the sort of western Iran area, what today is in western Iran, they bring them over here into near the Israel area, more likely than not. When you look at what's talked about in Kings, it's pretty clear that's the case. And so Isaiah is being influenced by Zoroastrianism. This used to be a deal breaker, actually, for early Isaiah, for Deutero-Isaiah being a little early, because people said, Zoroaster 600 BC, because some of the evidence says that. Well, go look at the earliest stuff that's actually attributed to Zoroaster. Look at the actual language of it. This is not 600 BC language. This is about 1000 BC language, and it's related to some other stuff from over there in that area, from sort of Iran. Zoroaster is probably from Uzbekistan, but you can look at the broader linguistic area, which is actually quite large, and you can see, no, this is actually similar to this stuff from 1000 BC from over here. So the notion that Zoroastrianism ideas have spread by this point, by Isaiah's time, is not strange at all. It's 300 years. That's plenty of time. And we even have a very plausible route of how this is spread. And we can see actually this same spread happening, something very similar happening with the worship of a god called Bethel. And so it's pretty cut and dried that this is not strange after all. So having Zoroastrianism in here is not that weird. And we're going to get a direct quotation from the Gathas in just a minute here, which is the earliest Zoroastrian scripture. So once again, not that weird, but he's probably tipping his hat to Zoroastrianism here and saying that part of Zoroastrianism is not quite right. That we're not having this constant fight between the good God and the bad God. We are having a constant fight between good and evil, but God's the one that makes light and darkness. He's the one that makes peace, but sometimes has bad things happen to people. So once again, this is a very kind of difficult topic, and Isaiah's take is going to be a little bit different than what we get later. And I think it's good to nuance this notion of making evil happen, Because sometimes we look at our lives and we say, well, maybe God just hates me because everything's going badly. I don't think we should take that away from Isaiah. This needs to be read in light of other things like, for example, Job, where God says, listen, Job, sometimes bad stuff just happens. And honestly, the Book of Mormon does that too. We just see the parts that say, if you keep the commandments, you prosper in the land. Okay, fine. But then what happens to all these other guys in the Book of Mormon who seem to keep the commandments just fine and who have all these problems, who become slaves, in fact? So the cut and dried view, I think the Book of Mormon is trying to nuance that concept of prospering in the land. Well, what does it mean to prosper in the land? Does it mean that everything's going to be fine all the time? Well, no. But does that mean that God's punishing you? Well, no, not always, right? And so this is a complicated issue, and but Isaiah here, I think, is saying, I allow bad things to happen sometimes to people, and this happens to help them to change their ways. So then he says, drop down, ye heavens from above, and let the skies pour down righteousness. So the idea here is righteousness is dropping down from the heavens like rain. And let the earth open and let them bring forth salvation. Let righteousness spring up together. I, the Lord, have created it. So the idea is the heavens will pour down righteousness and the earth will open up and salvation will and righteousness will grow up like plants. And he says, I, the Lord, have made these things too, right? I'm the one, the Lord is saying, that has made all of these things. But woe unto him that striveth with his maker. So he's saying, if Jehovah's the one that made everything, then why are you fighting with the one that made everything? Doesn't that make exactly zero sense? Let the potsherds strive with the potsherds of the earth. He's saying a broken piece of pottery, let the broken piece of pottery fight with another broken piece of pottery on the earth. It makes literally no sense. Shall the clay say to him that fashioneth it, what makest thou? Or thy work he hath no hands? Is the clay that's being turned into a pot really going to say, hey, what you making there, champ? No, it's not. It's not. Or the thing that's being made, hey, what are you doing? You don't have any hands. It makes no sense, right? Woe to him that saith to his father, what begettest thou? Or to the woman, what hast thou brought forth? Obviously, no preborn baby is going to say, hey, what you doing there, Dad? Or, Mom, what did you bear there? Well, no, obviously that makes no sense. And he's saying this makes just about as much sense as fighting against God. It says, thus saith the Lord, the Holy One of Israel, and his Maker, ask me of things to come concerning my sons, and concerning the work of my hands, command ye me. It says, thus saith the Lord, the Holy One of Israel. Remember, Holy One of Israel is a favorite term of Isaiah. Holy can have a lot of meanings. In this context, maybe mighty is not a bad connotation. Mighty One of Israel and his Maker, the one who literally made everything, the Creator God. We're running with this idea here of Jehovah as the Creator God. And that's pretty important in this context. Because that's actually not a foregone conclusion, right? We think of, of course Jehovah's the Creator God, but in some times of the Old Testament, he seems to just be thought of as a warrior deity by some people. And Isaiah is saying, nope, he's the Creator God. He doesn't have these limited roles as we might think of him in this sort of polytheistic context. He has no limited role to just being a warrior. He's the Creator God too. It says, ask me of things to come concerning my sons, and concerning the work of my hands command ye me. It says, okay, great. Ask me about things that are going to happen relating to my children, to Israel, and you might say to everyone. Concerning the work of my hands command ye me, or tell me what you want me to tell you, right? The command is probably that in this context. It says, I have made the earth and created man upon it. I, even my hands, have stretched out the heavens. It says, I'm the one that went down in Genesis, and I took the dirt and I fashioned man out of the dirt with my own hands. And I made the earth too. My own hands have stretched out the heavens, and all their host have I commanded. There's this idea that the heavens were like this dome, right? And so you're literally stretching it out. You're almost as though you were pulling this thing and stretching it out to make this dome over the earth. That was the concept of the heavens. And so that actually makes a lot of sense in this context. All their hosts have I commanded as the stars, right? That he stretched out the heavens and he's commanded the stars to do things. That is not actually a foregone conclusion in the ancient Near East. Some people thought that the stars were these sort of independent beings that kind of did what they wanted. And that's seen as the heavenly host, right, as these stars. And Isaiah is saying, nope, God's the one actually that controls these. They are not independent. The heavenly host have I commanded, putting words into God's mouth, saying what God told to him. I'm the one, God's the one, that commands this heavenly host actually. So I have raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. Now what is this? Suddenly, we've gone back to something different. I've raised him up in righteousness, and I will direct all his ways. This actually may be Abraham again, right? Because this is this sort of sandwich that once again makes some sense. He's talking about Abraham. He's talking about Abraham fleeing from idolatry and how silly idolatry is. Once again, if this is Abraham, then this aside makes sense. He says, I have raised him up in righteousness, Abraham. I will direct all his ways, or once again, because the Septuagint suggests some of this should be past tense, I've directed all his ways. He has built my city, to put this in the past tense. He has released my captives, not for price nor reward, saith the Lord of hosts. Once again, he has built my city, though. That's a little bit weird in the context of Abraham. However, there are traditions about the early life of Abraham in some sources, including some Islamic sources, talking about Abraham, who is actually building the certain places, building even temples. So, once again, he may just be riffing on that older tradition. He has built my city. He shall let go my captives. Remember in Genesis 14, he is fighting in that war in order to release Lot. So he will let go my captives, or captive maybe, not for price nor reward, saith the Lord of hosts. So once again, past tense. So he's built my city and released my captives, but not for price nor for reward. He wasn't doing this for money. He was doing this because he wanted to do it. And so then it says, thus saith the Lord of hosts, or the Lord of armies. That makes sense in this military context. So, once again, this thing that looks like Cyrus is probably Abraham, just like Genesis 41. Thus saith the Lord, the labor of Egypt and the merchandise of Ethiopia and of the Sabians. So, what is this here? The labor of Egypt? What is he talking about here? So here we're talking about these different groups of people, right? Thus saith the Lord, the labor of Egypt and merchandise of Ethiopia and of the Sabians. This here, it says labor, but this is probably the product of labor. So the products of Ethiopia, the merchandise of Ethiopia and of the Sabians. Ethiopia could mean more or less the Ethiopia, sort of maybe Somalia also, Eritrea, kind of that area of Africa. But it could also, the word in Hebrew is Cush, and there is an actual place, Cush. It's in this, what is today Sudan. So this could be Sudan. But then it says, and of the Sabians, so it could be talking about Ethiopia, because Sabia is sort of southern Arabia area, but either way, it's that area. So Egypt, sort of Sudan, Ethiopia, Horn of Africa, and southern Arabia area, all that area. And that is the really, really nice area where the incense comes from, at least down there. So it says, men of stature shall come over unto thee. So these big, sort of exotic Africans, he's used this image before, but these big people from Africa, they're a little bit different, shall come over unto thee, and they shall be thine. They shall come after thee. So these people will come, and they will come behind, right after, they'll come behind you. In chains they shall come over, and they shall fall down unto thee. They shall make supplication unto thee, saying, surely God is in thee, and there is none else, there is no God. So they will all come over to them in chains. They'll fall down and say, God is in you. There are no other gods. It says there is no God, but it means there are no other gods. Only Jehovah is God. So you have this image of these people from far away, from all the way down in Egypt, and sort of almost the ends of the earth from a southern perspective from during Isaiah's time. They are going to come over and say, we believe in Jehovah. Now, this notion of them coming in chains could mean the idea that all the stuff is going to come to them because they have conquered it and they have taken these people captive, and then they swear loyalty to Jehovah and then are freed, maybe. But it could also mean the idea that these people are slaves, that they're going to come over to Israel and they're going to escape and come to Israel and swear loyalty to Jehovah and be freed. But then, let's continue here. It says, verily thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel, the Savior. They shall be ashamed and also confounded, all of them. They shall go to confusion together that are makers of idols. But Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. He shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens, God himself that formed the earth and made it, he hath established it. He created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. I have not spoken in secret in a dark place of the earth. I said not unto the seed of Jacob, seek ye me in vain. I, the Lord, speak righteousness. I declare things that are right. Now, once again, we have to see all of this in its context. We talk about these Africans coming up to Israel in chains and swearing to the Lord. You might initially think of that as being like modern African slavery, but modern African slavery and this kind of slavery are rather different. And I think that we can't sort of import that idea onto this. It just so happens in this section that these are Africans, but we can't sort of import modern ideas onto that. In the ancient world, you don't really get huge amounts of discrimination based on skin color. You are going to get people notice skin color in ancient Egypt, and you get people that are depicted in certain ways based on their skin color. But it's not as though somehow these Africans are like horrible, right? Once again, it's ancient Egypt that you're seeing the distinctions in the various skin colors on paintings and stuff like that. But it's when they're talking about other races and other cultures, it's not necessarily a purely skin color sort of thing. There's certain ideological things related to this, and there's even linguistic things that more identify you as being a foreigner than even skin color. So, once again, this is a little bit uncomfortable because of our history with African slavery, but we shouldn't necessarily import that onto this. And here in 15, he says, verily thou art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel, the Savior. This is actually meant to talk about what's going to eventually happen. Right now, you're a God that hides yourself, O God of Israel, the Savior. Not everybody knows about you right now and wants to come to you to live under your leadership and to be freed from their chains. But that, I think, is the idea here. Verily thou art a God that hidest yourself. Yeah, you hide yourself, but it's not always going to be like that. They shall be ashamed and also confounded, all of them. They shall go to confusion together that are makers of idols. All these people that make idols are going to be ashamed and are going to realize how ridiculous the whole thing was. And this resonates with what we've been talking about here the whole time. God is the only God. Those that make idols are going to realize that this was totally ridiculous. They shall go to confusion together that are makers of idols. All these people that have made idols are going to realize that their idols couldn't help them, but Israel shall be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. These bad things are going to happen to all these people that worship idols because their idols can't save them. But Israel will be saved in the Lord with an everlasting salvation. Right now, it's like God is hiding himself, but someday it's not going to be that way. Everyone is going to look around them and say, wow, these idols were worthless. But Israel's doing fine. Their God must be real. Ye shall not be ashamed nor confounded, world without end. You will not be ashamed or confounded until the end of time. For thus saith the Lord that created the heavens God himself that formed the earth and made it. Once again, we're bringing back the idea of Jehovah as the creator deity. Now, once again, in Zoroastrianism, we get the idea of Ahura Mazda as something of a creator deity. And so this idea of bringing in Zoroastrian stuff here makes some sense. We're going to see a little bit more of that in a minute. It says, he hath established it and created it not in vain. He formed it to be inhabited. Now that exact phrase, he formed it to be inhabited, that shows up in the Book of Mormon. God created the earth that it should be inhabited. Okay. But also, when you look carefully at the Gathas, the earliest Zoroastrian text, that is there too. That's a direct quotation from the Gathas. God created it to be inhabited. Now, it doesn't look like that at first. Not all translations render it that way, but you go back, you compare it with a language called Vedic, an old Indian language that it's related to. It's clearly that he formed it to be inhabited. I am the Lord, and there is none else. So we actually are getting here this Zoroastrian idea. And so then, in the very next verse, 19, it says, I have not spoken in secret in a dark place of the earth. So in 15, he says, truly you're a God that hides yourself. But then he says, well, and that's what it seems like at first, but actually that's not really the case. And he's clarifying that here. At first it might seem truly God hides himself, but that's not really what happens. And that may be words in the mouth of those people that say, surely God is in thee, there's none else, there's no God. Verily there art a God that hidest thyself, O God of Israel, the Savior. These people might have thought that, but he's explaining, no, God doesn't hide himself. If he hid himself, if he had spoken in secret, how would these Zoroastrian people know the truth, right? So he quotes from the Gathas, from Zoroastrianism, and then says, I have not spoken in secret. I didn't just speak to you guys. I said some things to this guy Zoroaster too, and he used it as part of his religion. He didn't get it all right, but he's saying, I've spoken to this Zoroaster guy too. And so for Isaiah to quote it then makes sense in this context, because thus I have not spoken in secret. I spoke to Zoroaster as well, in a dark place of the earth. I didn't just hide over here in Israel and just talk to you guys. I've talked to these other guys too, hence the quotation from the Gathas from Zoroastrianism, because Zoroaster got it right too. So God must have been speaking to him at least sometimes too. It says, I said not unto the seed of Jacob, seek ye me in vain. I, the Lord, speak righteousness. I declare things that are right. I didn't say, oh, hey, you can try to find me, but you're never going to find me, actually. Seek ye me in vain. It says, no, I declare righteousness. I declare things that are right. You can find me, and I will help you. Here we get, assemble yourselves and come. Draw near together, ye that are escaped of the nations. They have no knowledge that set up the wood of their graven image, and pray unto a God that cannot save. Tell ye and bring them near, yea, let them take counsel together. Who hath declared this from ancient time? Who hath told it from that time? Have not I the Lord? And there is no God else beside me. I, a just God and a Savior, there is none beside me. Look unto me, and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is none else. I have sworn by myself, the word has gone out of my mouth in righteousness, and shall not return, that unto me every knee shall bow, and every tongue shall swear. Surely shall one say, in the Lord have I righteousness and strength. Even to him shall men come, and all that are incensed against him shall be ashamed. And the Lord shall all the seed of Israel be justified, and shall glory. So assemble yourselves together and come. Gather yourselves together and come. So why is he saying all of this? I think it makes sense now in this context. All you people that have been scattered everywhere, they've been taken into slavery by the Assyrians, he's saying, get yourselves together and come back. Or even to the people who have been displaced within Judah itself, get yourselves together, come here, draw near together, ye that are escaped of the nations, those that have escaped the Assyrian, either have escaped from Assyrian deportation, or those that have escaped the Assyrian onslaught and are still alive. They have no knowledge that set up the wood of their graven image and pray unto a God that cannot save. Do not sit here and try to worship idols thinking this is going to help you. Come back to me, God is saying. Tell ye and bring them near, let them take counsel together. Who hath declared this from ancient time? Who told you that all this was going to happen? Doesn't Isaiah call this whole thing before it happened? Who hath told it from that time? Have not I the Lord, and there is no God else beside me, a just God and a Savior. There is none beside me. Saying Jehovah's the one that called all this. He predicted all of this. There is no God beside him. He is the only just God. He's the one that can save you. There's no other God beside him. And so he says, look unto me and be ye saved. Now this is interesting in light of the Book of Mormon, because this is exactly what Jesus says to the multitude in 3 Nephi 12. Therefore come unto me and be ye saved. For verily I say unto you, except ye shall keep my commandments, which I have commanded you at this time, ye shall in no case enter into the kingdom of heaven. So it's very interesting that here in Isaiah we have Jesus there quoting Isaiah. Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth. Now in the context of 3 Nephi, all the ends of the earth makes sense. They really are pretty far away from Israel at this point. So all the ends of the earth is fitting for these people in 3 Nephi. Look unto me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth, for I am God, and there is none else. All the ends of the earth, all those people, like I was talking about, from Africa and from all these other places where the Israelites have been deported to, and everyone, in fact, in the whole world just needs to come to Christ and be saved. Jehovah is the only God, and there is none else. I have sworn by myself, the word has gone out of my mouth in righteousness and shall not return, that unto me every knee shall bow and every tongue shall swear. This idea that we've seen alluded to earlier of everybody bowing the knee to God and swearing loyalty to him, making a covenant to him. That's what this is. We hear this because this is quoted in the New Testament. It's quoted in our liturgy, so we are familiar with this. But that's what he's saying here. Everyone will come to me, be loyal to me, and bow the knee to me as their king and God. I have sworn by myself. Why does he sworn by himself? Because in the ancient Near East, you're supposed to swear in the name of a deity. You're not supposed to violate. That's what it means to bear false, or to take the name of the Lord in vain. It doesn't mean to say bad words like we usually think of it today. It means to swear in the name of a deity and not follow through. But when you swear in the name of a deity, you're going to do something, you're supposed to do it. So I have sworn by myself, because there was no God that was greater than him that he could swear by. So he has to swear by himself. We see this in Genesis. It gets referenced in Hebrews. God says, I've sworn by myself, the word has gone out of my mouth in righteousness and shall not return. We get this idea of words having power. And you can't take back words because they have this sort of numinous power. That unto me every knee shall bow and every tongue shall swear. Everyone will bow the knee to God, to Jehovah, to God. Surely shall one say, in the Lord have I righteousness and strength. Even to him shall men come, and all that are incensed against him shall be ashamed. So people will realize, oh, the Lord's the only one that has real power. We're all going to go to him. And those that are angry with him, things are not going to go well for them. And the Lord shall all the seed of Israel be justified and shall glory. All the seed of Israel will be justified, and they will find glory in the Lord. And that's sort of a beautiful image here. In other words, all the seed of Israel will be seen to be righteous, and will be able to sort of boast in and praise the Lord because of all the amazing things that God has done here. And as we wrap up, I just want to talk briefly about the temple again. So in verse 3, I will give thee the treasures of darkness and hidden riches of secret places. Now clearly, once again, this is all battle imagery, but we've been seeing things about being anointed and holding his hand and all these other things, treasures of darkness and hidden riches. That can be talking about literal physical riches buried in the ground, but in light of the temple motifs in the book of Abraham, it could also be talking about these sort of temple concepts that are valuable, sort of hidden riches, and being called by a name. We see all these temple things here in Isaiah 45. And being girded, right, being clothed. We can see all these things as we go through this. And to me, it is very interesting to read all of this in light of the temple, because the objective that he's talking about here is everybody coming and bowing the knee to God and confessing that he is the only way to really find salvation, that these other gods are worthless, that Jehovah's the only God. And so when you go to the temple and you see people from all over the world in the temple, I think that is important to remember, that that's what we're talking about here, that we're realizing in a small way this image of Isaiah, of people from all over the world, from Africa and Arabia, like he's talked about, but from East Asia, from South America, from Central America, from Europe, from all over the whole world, people being there in the temple. And I think that that is a beautiful thing here, that in our own small way, we're realizing what Isaiah is talking about here in Isaiah 45. And to me, that's a beautiful thing. Now, this is one of the, like I said, one of the key chapters that people use to talk about Cyrus. Like I said, I think it makes more sense in the context of Abraham. And we will continue on here. A lot of this other stuff just works just fine in its context there during Isaiah's time. Every now and then we'll run into some stuff that feels a little post-exilic. We'll talk about that then. Once again, we are having some glosses. 48, right? Thankfully, we have the Book of Mormon version from that. There are some things there that seem odd, but once again make sense. But we're just going to plow through this and talk about it in Isaiah's context and just try to make sense of it. But thanks for being with me today, and we'll see you all next time.